has the pride, the heritage, the skills and the future to not only deliver this coking coal mine, but the future industries of 4.0.
Well, I'm tempted to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that any tree that is hugged by my honourable friend is a very lucky tree. But on the substance of the very important point that she makes, yes, in order to ensure that we have a transition to net zero, we do need to reduce our reliance on a variety of different materials. But as the inspector makes clear, and as she quite rightly points out, the economic benefits to the North West that this development brings are also entirely consistent with our broader environmental ambitions.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Right Honourable Member for Reading West, the President of COP, says that 85% of this coal will be exported. Is he wrong?
Secretary of
The
State.
inspector makes clear in his report that it is the case that by sourcing coal from this mine, there will be a beneficial effect in terms of greenhouse gas emissions.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Cumbria Planning Committee, after careful consideration, approved this planning application. The Secretary of State then called it in for an independent review. The independent planning inspector, after careful consideration of all the evidence, recommended approval. And given my confidence in my right honourable friend to be a rational man, would he not agree with me that it would be completely irrational to override the recommendations of the planning inspector and refuse this planning application, which has great benefit to the United Kingdom?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend who has a matchless knowledge of the planning process. Again, I would urge all colleagues to read my decision letter and the inspector's report. It gives a full account of all of the evidence that was placed before him. As I said in my original statement, this planning application has given rise to strong feelings on either side, but the inspector's report lays out a particular case, and as I read the inspector's report and saw the conclusions that he drew, so my decision letter followed. I hope that all colleagues will have the chance to read the report and make their own judgments.
Vera Hobhouse.
Deputy Speaker, this decision is a travesty of the word transition. It is a full-blown backward step to more fossil fuel in the UK. In June, the government overturned a local planning decision to not allow drilling at Horse Hill in Surrey. Now we have mining in Cumbria. This is a trend here, and as we've heard, most of it is for export, not for local UK need or use, because the industry needs to make a profit, hence the vast quantity that it wants to explore for profit for the fossil fuel industry. If the issue is really about that the government is stuck with a quasi-judicial planning decision, isn't it high time for branch and root reform of the planning system that puts net zero at the core of every decision rather than bending to the fossil fuel industry?
Secretary of State.
Well, again, I would urge the honourable lady, who I know takes environmental issues seriously, to look in the inspector's report in full, to look, for example, at paragraph 21(1.27, where the inspector outlines there will be some, but unquantifiable, likely reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from transportation as a result of domestic production. Looking at the report in full and in the round, she will see that all of the environmental arguments, which she takes seriously, are rehearsed, considered, and then an appropriate conclusion is made. Entirely separate to the planning inspector's report, I would also say that I would welcome her and her party's contribution to the consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework that we have put forward. I'm sure that she will find in that a number of measures that will meet concerns that she and others have expressed in order to safeguard our environment more effectively.
Brendan Clark-Smith.
Deputy Speaker, Basildon has a proud mining history, and along with many of my constituents, I'd like to praise my right honourable friend for the leadership and the pragmatism that he has shown on this issue. And there has been some concern about importing our coking coal from countries with lower environmental standards than ourselves. And of course, we need metallurgical coking coal for making steel, as has already been referred to. But now we can mine to our high environmental standards and, of course, also cut out the need need for the transportation of this as well halfway across the world. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that far from having a negative effect on our own net zero ambitions, this decision actually reinforces them?
Secretary of State.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and he will know how rare it is that I quote from the European Commission approvingly. However, it is the case in the inspector's report that he quotes from the European Commission and states that the European Commission recognises, quotes, the indispensable role of coking coal during the steel industry's transition to climate neutrality. So, as my honourable friend has pointed out, expertise cited by the inspector all points to the wisdom of allowing this mine to go ahead.
Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The world is meeting currently in Montreal for COP15 to deal with the pressing climate and nature crisis that we're facing. A common message from there is that coal should be kept in the ground. And it is going to be incredibly difficult for the government to convince the public at home and abroad that opening a new coal mine is dealing with that urgent climate crisis in a progressive way. His colleague, the former COP26 president, described this decision as an own goal. So can I ask the Secretary of State whether he thinks approving a new coal mine in the middle of a climate crisis will enhance or damage Britain's reputation as a global green leader?
Secretary of State.
Again, I would stress the importance of looking at what the inspector says. He quite rightly points out that international partners are meeting in Montreal alongside the UK in order to uphold the importance of biodiversity and to help to protect species. I should point out that in paragraph 21.163 of the inspector's report, he specifically addresses the question of biodiversity and says that he is satisfied that the supplemental undertaking given by the applicant would ensure that the proposed development would provide for a minimum net gain in biodiversity of 10% prior to the commencement of production and a further net gain to be achieved on restoration. So the inspector took account of biodiversity in coming to his judgment, and so have I.
James Daly.
Deputy Speaker, would my honourable friend agree that the evidence before the inquiry pointed to the fact that blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace production is likely to continue in the UK and Europe to around at least 2040 and probably 2050? And therefore, if we need coking coal up to 2050, what on earth are parties in the chamber doing, arguing that we should be importing it from Russia rather than creating 500 high-paid, high-skilled jobs in Cumbria, transforming both our economy, supporting the steel industry and delivering on our levelling up promises?
Secretary of State.
Well, again, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and again, he makes a very important point. Of course, as the inspector notes, there are new alternative technologies that are being developed, which will mean that the reliance on coking coal can be reduced over time. But on the evidence put in front of the inspector, as my honourable friend points out, there will be a need for coking coal for decades to come, and it is better that that coking coal comes from a net zero metallurgical mine, of which this is the only one which the inspector is aware exists in the globe.
Claire Hanna.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a backward step, and honourable friends have rightly laid out the regressive impact environmentally and what this says about the government's seriousness on net zero. My Assembly Party colleagues used the devolved powers they had to ensure a moratorium on fracking in Northern Ireland, but there's genuine concern of the potential for this government to make similar unwanted and damaging decisions in our region in the absence of the protection of devolution. Can the Minister confirm that any decision about its extraction in Northern Ireland are for devolved ministers, where a majority of people want to keep it in the ground and want instead to see investment in renewables and their huge potential for green jobs?
Secretary of State.
I appreciate the honourable lady's position. I shan't, if she'll forgive me, get drawn into the question of executive formation in Northern Ireland. I know that everyone wants to make sure that we can make progress there, and I do take account of the importance that she quite rightly places on devolved decision making. It is an aspiration that I share.
Chris Green.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The opposition have no concern over European and other countries burning lignite to power their industries and rarely distinguish between thermal and metallurgical coal. So will my right honourable friend renew his commitment to evidence-based policy making and the ongoing revival of British mining and manufacturing?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm really grateful to my honourable friend. And again, the 350-page report looks at all the evidence, at the competing arguments, before coming to that conclusion. I know that he, like many colleagues, has looked closely at that report before coming to his own judgment. I would urge all colleagues across the House to do so.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And a Conservative member over there talked about the ongoing revival of coal mines. This decision is not only an act of climate vandalism, but steel industry experts say it's completely unnecessary and that the British steel industry needs green investment. So we know that when it comes to the issue of the energy crisis, securing good local well-paid jobs across the country, these things are important, but isn't investing in renewables and a national programme of housing insulation the real way to do that?
State.
Well, the government is investing in renewables, and the leadership that has been shown by the UK government and by partners across the UK in the provision of offshore wind, I think, is a demonstration of that. But as I pointed out earlier, when it comes to offshore and indeed onshore wind, a critical component in the manufacture of the turbines that we rely on is, of course, steel. If we are to continue to produce steel in future, we will need coking coal for decades to come, and it is better, the inspector concludes, that that coking coal comes from a mine which is net zero.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I commend the Secretary of State for taking this bold decision which will help to create hundreds of high-skilled, high-valued jobs in a part of the country long forgotten by the Labour Party. Does he agree with me that it would be foolish to leave strategic industries such as steel production reliant upon materials sourced from our economic competitors when we can source the materials we need here at home?
Secretary of State.
Yes, I think my honourable friend makes a very, very good point. And again, I refer back to my decision letter, where I acknowledge that the inspector makes the point at paragraph 21.121 that the effects of downstream emissions as a result of the extraction of this coal may well be considered neutral or slightly beneficial when compared with other extractive sources. And of course he's referring to the foreign sources of coal, which my honourable friend refers to.
Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think the Minister has just admitted to my honourable friend, the member for Bristol East, that when he talks of net zero, he's not factoring the use of the coal that's extracted. I would ask the Minister, does he not respect the expertise of the member for Reading West, the former COP26 president, who has said opening a new coal mine will not only be a backward step for UK climate action, but also damage the UK's hard-won reputation through our COP26 presidency as a leader in the global fight against climate change. This is an incredibly important issue. People are really concerned about climate change. I would ask the Minister to think again.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable lady for making her point. And again, the inspector makes clear that whether or not we use coking coal from the UK or elsewhere, there will automatically be emissions, but it is better, taking every piece of evidence in the round, that a continued reliance on coking coal, and the inspector makes clear that that is likely for decades to come, it is better that that coking coal comes from this mine than from other sources abroad.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State very much for a very comprehensive and detailed statement. But can the Secretary of State confirm, and is the Secretary of State satisfied that all steps will be taken and have been taken to protect surrounding environment, and that health and safety would also be paramount, and that local people living close by have been closely and fully consulted?
Yes, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for making all those points. Again, the inspector's report, and I'm sorry to keep returning to it in one level, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I think it is important to return to it, deals with all of those issues and more. And I just wanted to take the opportunity of his question to say to the House and to other interested parties that, of course, I've sought to answer every question put to me as fully as possible with reference to the inspector's report, but nothing that I have said in this chamber in response to questions should be taken account of without also taking account all of the arguments in the inspector's report and in my decision letter I'm very grateful to so many colleagues for taking this important issue so seriously, and I do urge all interested parties to read the full inspector's report in order to understand the arguments that were put to him and that he eventually judged.
Thanks, Secretary of State. And we now come to the backbench debate on the 12th report of the Health and Social Care Committee, Cancer Services and the Government's response. Chair of the Committee, Steve Bryan, to move.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that this House has considered the Health and Social Care Committee's report on cancer services and the Government's response to it. Now, I'm of course very grateful to the Liaison Committee for selecting this topic for debate in the Chamber today. We know that 1 in 2 people in the UK will develop cancer at some point in their lives. So it's no exaggeration to say this is an issue that affects everyone in the House, indeed everyone in the country in one way or another. It's touched my life to the worse many times, and I'll touch on that later. It's why the Health and Social Care Select Committee produced a report on cancer services earlier this year, and I pay tribute to my predecessor in that role, my right honourable friend, the member for South West Surrey, for his leadership in producing that work. And that statistic, that awful statistic, is why I have made cancer a priority for myself as the new chair of the committee. Now, our report found that great strides had indeed been made in improving survival from cancer. Thanks to the tireless work of our scientists, our researchers, our doctors, our nurses, and others, including ministers, over many, many years. More than half of people diagnosed with cancer now live for 5 years or more, compared to only 1 in 3 people 50 years ago. But we also heard, Madam Deputy Speaker, that cancer survival in England, and indeed the rest of the UK, continues to lag behind comparable countries around the world. The International Cancer Benchmarking Partnership explained that just under 60% of people diagnosed with bowel cancer in England, for instance, will live for 5 years or more. That figure compares to 66.8% of people diagnosed with bowel cancer in Canada and almost 71% in Australia. The pattern is seen in many other cancer types, including lung cancer, which of course took our great friend James Brokenshire last year, pancreatic cancer, which took my own father, who was diagnosed in September of 2019 and was dead 3 days after the general election that December, and ovarian cancer, which has also touched my family and so many people. We had target ovarian cancer in this House earlier this month, last month, sorry. And my good friend, the member for Washington North, I believe, who chairs that all-party group, led their reception downstairs in the Churchill Room, and they launched their Pathfinder study, Faster, Further and Fairer. And that notes that 4,000 women a year still lose their lives to ovarian cancer, and I would highly recommend its excellent work, its excellent report to members. Now, we know that one of the biggest reasons for this gap in survival, that I quoted some comparative figures there, is that the NHS does tend to diagnose fewer cancers at an early stage when it is, of course, much more treatable. Early diagnosis of cancer is magic key, as has been said so many times from these benches. Now, NHS England has set a target to diagnose 75% of cancers at an early stage by 2028, compared to around 54% today. And achieving this, we say, would make a huge difference to outcomes. I agreed that target when I was the Cancer Minister a few years ago, and I firmly believe that it's the right target to give more people the best possible chance of surviving their cancer. But I think we need to be much more ambitious and get upstream of many cancers, and I'll return to that. Last month, the excellent Dame Callie Palmer, who's the National Cancer Director, also works at Marsden, told us in a special topical session of the Select Committee that she remained, quote, cautiously optimistic that the 75% target would be met, and told us about some great progress being made on programs like targeted lung screening. We've all heard about the supermarket checks, which is diagnosing lots of early stage lung cancers in the pilot studies, and has great promise actually. But Dame Callie's optimism, I have to say, was not entirely shared by many experts who gave evidence to our inquiry into cancer services. John Butler, a specialist in ovarian cancer, thought that it was, in his words, extremely unlikely that that 75% target would be reached. And Dr. Jeanette Dixon, an oncologist, said the NHS, her words again, were doing very badly against the target. This is a worry. Regrettably, we concluded in our work that the NHS was not on track to meet the 75% target. And I have to say it's a judgment that was shared by the committee's independent panel of experts who evaluated government progress on cancer services. Now, the government responded to us and said that it was premature to say that progress towards this target is off track. But the National Audit Office found that 56% of patients are being diagnosed at stages 1 or 2 so far this year, which is the same proportion as when I made the target in 2019. And of course, it's below the level of improvement required to reach that 3/4 target of early diagnosis by 2028. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't agree that it can ever be premature to call for more to be done to make progress on early diagnosis, when failing to achieve the target could mean so many hundreds of thousands of people missing out on an early cancer diagnosis, and of course a better chance of living for longer and surviving their cancer. Now, the committee heard extremely powerfully why it's so important to make more and faster progress on diagnosing cancers earlier. In December 2020, Andrea Brady's daughter Jess died from stage 4 adenocarcinoma at the age of just 27 years old. Before her diagnosis, Jess had been passed from pillar to post, repeatedly consulting with multiple GPs and other clinicians before her mother was finally forced to pay for a private consultation just to get Jess a diagnosis. By that point, tragically, it was too late. Jess passed away in hospital three and a half weeks after she was diagnosed. So meeting the target of diagnosing 75% of cancers at an early stage would mean thousands of people being given a better chance of surviving their cancer, and thousands fewer families having to suffer such terrible losses. And that's why we called in our report for the then promised 10-year cancer plan to kick-start progress on early diagnosis. We called for it to consider more radical proposals on how to diagnose more cancers at an early stage, and to include an associated workforce plan to reduce the diagnostic bottlenecks in the system. And there's good work ongoing, and I know the Minister will talk about this later on. New research like the NHS Galleri blood test trial could be potentially transformative. Indeed, last month our colleagues at NHS England would not be drawn on whether there is a need for a new 10-year cancer plan, as previous governments have promised. They seem to imply that the new plan wasn't needed given the focus of the long-term plan on early diagnosis. I would contest that. The consultation that was done on a new 10-year cancer plan was responded to by the sector, by charities, by Royal Colleges, by many organisations, and it has set many hairs running and great expectation about there being a future cancer plan. So I think we on the committee, and I see other members present in the House, we are concerned about that. And we're not hung up on plans, but in my experience of being a minister, the NHS loves a plan, the NHS needs a plan, and critically it allows this House to see where we are against a plan. So achieving early diagnosis is not just about what NHS England can do from the centre. It's also about improving public awareness of the many signs and symptoms of cancer across all communities. It's about making sure that GPs have good systems in place for managing patients with possible cancers and are able to refer them on for tests without barriers. It's about the continual improvement of screening programmes and hard work, really hard work in local areas to encourage people to come forward. And of course, this is one of the great promise of the new integrated care systems, working with the cancer networks, the cancer alliances, to deliver on that system population, that system early diagnosis, system prevention. And it's about focusing research and innovation on developing new ways to detect cancer, especially those which are hard to diagnose, and ensuring the NHS is set up to roll out new tests quickly. And I referred to Gallery earlier, and I mentioned earlier about upstream cancer. And we're going to be doing a piece of work next year that I loosely call Future Cancer, because it is important, of course, that we diagnose cancers early, and that is the basis of the remarks I'm making today. But at the moment, largely what we do is diagnose cancers, and then when they are symptomatic, and hopefully we catch those symptoms early and then we treat them early, and many cancers, not all, are preventable when that happens. What I'm interested in, as well as that, is future cancer. So where can we get upstream of this? Where can we use our genomics, the NHS's new genomics strategy? Where can we use biomarkers to get ahead of that? And there are big moral and ethical questions that poses to us as a society. But this should not be a reason why we don't go there. It should not be a reason why we don't have that ambition. So all of this is about making sure that there is enough staff and machines in the system to do even more tests and give many more people the best possible chance of being diagnosed with cancer at an early stage. Now, the 10-year cancer plan should look again to make sure the government is truly pulling out all the stops to get to 75% at the early stage by 28. I hope the Minister will confirm the government is still committed to doing this work. And of course, early diagnosis means little if there's not sufficient capacity to provide people with the right treatments at the right time. Unfortunately, the latest data suggests that there has been a decline in the NHS's ability to provide this treatment. Whilst the vast majority of people do still receive timely treatment following a cancer diagnosis, in September nearly 10% of people waited more than a month for their first treatment following a diagnosis, compared to less than 5% in 2019. So that's more than 2,400 people having to wait more than an entire month to begin their cancer treatment, more than double the number waiting that long 2 years prior. As the former cancer director, Professor Sir Mike Richards, a giant in this area, often says, when you're waiting for a cancer diagnosis or treatment, it's not the 31 days that really matter, it's the 31 nights. And I know that people around the country will understand that. With great pleasure.
I'm grateful, and I wish to commend the Honourable Member for Winchester, the Chair of the Select Committee, for an excellent report and for an excellent analysis of the problems and the way forward. But he did refer to the latest cancer waiting times, and it's quite timely we're having this debate today, because the new cancer stats have been published by NHS England today, and they do actually show the position's worsening. In October of this year, 39.7% of cancer patients waited beyond 62 days for cancer treatment between urgent referral and treatment. So I think there is an urgency in addressing some of the issues the Chair raises.
Indeed, and the reason why we had Dame Callie and actually Professor Peter Johnson, who's the National Clinical Director for Cancer, into the Select Committee a couple of weeks ago is because the NHS has set itself a deadline of next spring, which actually was this spring, to get back to the 62-day wait. And you know, I have everything I have crossed that they can get there, but they need to make it happen. And I know they are relentlessly focused on that. I know the Minister is relentlessly focused on that, but we've got to help them get there. So the committee also heard about the challenges facing surgery and radiotherapy services, which is rather timely that the Honourable Gentleman should intervene on me at that point. I suspect he may speak about this later. Professor Pat Price, who he and I are going to meet early in the new year. He's a consultant oncologist at Imperial College in London, told us that radiotherapy services were lacking staff and machines to be able to deliver the best possible care, and that services were struggling to deliver the level of activity needed to catch up with the cancer backlog. And I will let the honourable gentleman expand on that a bit later on. Professor Mike Griffin, Professor of Surgery at Newcastle University, also highlighted workforce shortages as a significant barrier to effective cancer surgery, but he also told us about the organisation of services. Now, because cancer surgery is often co-located within general, acute and emergency care, it can be subject to delay because of capacity shortage, and this was a particular problem, of course, during COVID. In some places, but not everywhere. In my trust, Hampshire Hospitals, they did a brilliant job to keep cancer surgery on track at all times through doing it off-site, and I pay tribute to Alex Whitfield and her team at Hampshire Hospitals for the organisation that they made with Sarum Road Private Hospital in particular to make sure that patients continue to get their cancer treatment. Professor Griffin called for more ring-fenced hubs to be developed so that cancer surgery can continue even when there are severe pressures on acute care, and I hope the Minister may refer to that when she winds up. Now, growing the workforce, investing over the long term in machines and IT, reorganising services to create more cancer surgery hubs, these are in the government's gift, which is why we recommended the government should consider these actions in developing the 10-year plan. Now, without a wider focus on removing the barriers to the NHS delivering the best possible cancer treatments, the potential gains of earlier diagnosis may not be realised. And given the number of people presenting with cancer at the moment, which is of course a good thing, and many of them will not have cancer. They present with suspected cancer. Many of them will not turn out to have cancer. But where they do, we need to obviously to move on that, which is why treatment is the other side of the same coin. And of course, just as further progress in early diagnosis will depend on research and innovation to develop new tests, improving cancer treatments will require new and more advanced techniques to be developed and then implemented into the NHS. We found in the committee report that the UK is a genuine world leader in research, and it is. There are unique aspects to the NHS which make it an effective partner for research organisations. We also heard there are significant barriers to researchers accessing the data they need to quick and equitable patient recruitment to clinical trials, and to staff having the time they need to take part in research. Now, the government set out several steps it's taking to improve access to data and improve flexibility for staff wanting to take part in research. This is very welcome. But research by Cancer Research UK has found that the UK's recovery from the pandemic in clinical trials continues to be outpaced by other comparable UK countries. NHS England themselves told us that supporting clinical research into cancer is not their responsibility. So it's clear a wider effort is needed to make sure cancer research taking place in the NHS is well supported and aligned with the priorities for cancer services. Another reason why the plan, I would suggest, is important. Finally, we heard there is significant variation in outcome for people diagnosed with cancer, depending in part on the type of cancer they're diagnosed with, but also demographic factors. The government told us it will be addressing these differences through the Levelling Up White Paper, but also through the Health Disparities White Paper by addressing issues like smoking and obesity, which are more prevalent in our more deprived communities. And on that, there's a story in today's press which suggests that Britain has the biggest increase of early onset diabetes in the Western world. This is a huge concern, and of course I'm not suggesting diabetes is cancer. What I'm suggesting is that we have many suggested actions to reduce obesity around junk food advertising, stuff that follows on from the sugar tax. Much of that has still not been implemented. There are rumours abound, there are always rumours abound here, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are rumours abound the government are seeking to delay junk food advertising restrictions now back until 2025. I hope that is wrong, and I would invite the Minister to respond to that when she winds up, and if not, to take that away. And on that note, somebody who I know possibly shares that view, give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I 100% agree with his concerns about potential watering down of the much-needed obesity, anti-obesity measures. But does he also agree with me that it's important that we reflect what the public want? And the public are in agreement with banning advertising on TV for the particular foods that cause obesity. So if we want to keep the public on our side, surely we've got to do their wishes as well.
Yeah, and I think that is right. I mean, the public are very clear on this, and I get it. There are different views across this House. Those who disagree with a lot of the work that I did and my honourable friend did in government to push some of those measures to prevent obesity, I could agree with them, but then we'd both be wrong. At the end of the day, obesity is a driver of diabetes, as I just referred to. Obesity is a driver of cancers, of certain cancers. And we must take that seriously. And the Select Committee next year will be doing a huge piece of work on prevention. And we will be returning to this, and I hope ministers are aware of that. So the recognition of the importance of health in the Levelling Up white paper is very welcome. But without specific actions to address health disparities, this agenda will be at risk. So it's vital that the government takes up the prevention agenda again to stop more people from developing cancer in the first place. And I hope the Minister will have some good